Good afternoon. Thank you guys for coming. It's wonderful to see so many people here. My name is Tara Hodges, and I sort of pulled this together. I want to thank Mount Zion Church for giving us this amazing space to use. I want to thank Billy Hunt from Billy Hunt Photography. He's doing the videography for me. But I really want to thank Christian. He is out in the world doing some amazing things, and he's got a super busy schedule, and he still made time and energy to come and help us, and so I really appreciate that. And I want to take a lot of time because I want him to have as much time as possible, but I did want to give you some background on how this came together. I was really disturbed and saddened by everything that's happened in the community in the last year, and just sort of wondering what someone like me could do about that. And I was sitting around on New Year's Day looking through Facebook, and I came across a video of Sarah Silverman on her show, I Love You America, and she was doing an interview with Christian Picciolini, who is a former skinhead who's turned into a peace advocate. And the things that he was saying were really amazing, and they really moved me, and I thought, gosh, this is someone who could really come and help our community, and I just wondered if anyone had reached out to him. So I emailed him, and I didn't really have much hope that I would get a quick response or maybe no response at all, and I certainly didn't think he'd be available, but he immediately responded to me, and he was so enthusiastic and so loving, and here we are a little more than a month later, and he has come and graciously offered to help us work through some of this stuff. I think that the community was devastated by the events of the last year, and it wasn't just about the destruction of the events themselves. I feel like the white supremacists brought all of this, they incited this anger and fear and frustration in the community, and then they all went back into their social media holes, and we've been left with all of that. And when they were marching through the streets and spewing hate, it was really easy to see who the target of our anger and frustration should be. And then when they left, what do we do with all of that? And I think there has been some sort of turning of that negative energy onto each other. And Christian, I think, is the perfect person to talk to us about white supremacy and sort of how to combat these people when they come back to our community, but he's also a really great person to talk to us about healing. And I'm hoping that he can help the community open their hearts and their minds to each other and have some understanding and sort of come together, instead of working against each other, work against the real menace here, which is white supremacy. We're going to have a presentation from Christian, and then there's going to be opportunity for Q&A and discussion afterward. Just a few gentle reminders. Out of respect, please silence your cell phones. Out of respect for each other, during the discussion, please yield the floor to whoever has the microphone so everyone's got an opportunity to have their voice heard. And out of respect to our wonderful hosts, please refrain from profanity. Thank you so much for being here, and I want to introduce Christian Picciolini.
Maurice, can we have the presentation, please? First of all, it is my absolute honor to have been asked to come here. I'm sorry that it is under such dark circumstances. I wish I didn't have to give this talk. I wish that I could come here and enjoy this beautiful town that I've really fallen in love with since I've come here. And I wish that the good people of this community, once the haters have left, had decided not to turn on each other in some ways. So I'd like to just really tell you my story, and then maybe offer some input and some insight into how these groups operate, and also some things that I've put into practice that I've seen be very effective. So if you wouldn't mind just listening to my story, I'd be happy to tell you. My journey began, Maurice, next. My journey began 23 years ago. when I left the American white supremacist skinhead movement that I'd helped build. I was just 22 years old at the time, but I had already spent 8 years, every single one of my teen years, from the time I was 14 years old, as a member of America's first neo-Nazi white supremacist skinhead group. But before that, before I became that monster, next, Maurice. Sorry, this is not working. But before I became that monster that you saw in that picture there, I was a relatively normal young boy. My parents are Italian immigrants who came to the United States in the mid-1960s looking for a better life. And when they arrived, they were often the victims of prejudice themselves. Racism, discrimination, prejudice wasn't something that I was raised with. It just was not in my family's DNA. But because my parents are immigrants, they also had to work very hard and very long hours, sometimes 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, and I didn't see them very often. So I grew up wondering what I had done to push them away, wondering why I didn't have their love. Even though I was surrounded by it, I just didn't experience it. And I was too afraid to ask. I was young. I didn't feel comfortable talking to my parents that way. So I started to feel very lonely, and I felt very marginalized, and I was bullied growing up because I was different. I was the Italian kid in the white neighborhood where it wasn't very ethnic, and I suddenly became the outsider. So I developed very low self-esteem, and I really began to hate myself. I didn't understand where I belonged. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what my purpose was. And I was really struggling for those three very fundamental things that every human being looks for: identity, community, and purpose. I was very confused. And then I became very angry at my parents for this abandonment that I felt. So I started to rebel. And at 14 years old, in the picture that was just up before this one, I was standing in an alley one day, being very nihilistic, and I was smoking a joint, and a man came driving down that alley. The year was 1987. I was 14 years old. And he stopped just in front of me, got out of the car with a shaved head and with boots. He walked up to me and he pulled the joint from my lips, and he said, "That's what the communists and the Jews want you to do to keep you docile." I was 14 years old. In all honesty, I had never met a Jewish person. I didn't know what a communist was, and if I'm being completely honest, I really didn't know what the word docile meant either. It's true. But it seemed as though that was a lifeline to me. It was the first person that seemed to offer me some sort of acceptance. I had hit a wall for 14 years. I didn't have very many friends. Certainly didn't have very intimate relationships with my family. And when he threw me that lifeline, because it seemed like he cared about me enough to say something that my parents wouldn't say, because my parents would have said something like, "Don't do that because it's stupid," or "What will other people think if they see you doing that?" Well, this man came to me, and even though I had no idea what he was talking about, it seemed as though he was offering me some secret advice. And I took it, and I started to ride my little bike up and down that alley and start to blend in and start to mimic and sound like these older people who were what turned out to be America's first neo-Nazi skinhead group. And the man who had recruited me, Clark Martel, was America's first neo-Nazi skinhead leader. Nobody knew what a skinhead was in 1987 in America. I certainly didn't. And as I started to get involved, I started to become more confident. And it felt as though I had developed this identity. I was now this warrior for something that was pitched to me as being taken away from me. My white identity, my European heritage, my culture. I was told that blacks were moving into my neighborhoods to commit crime, to sell drugs. I was told that the Jews controlled the media and the finance systems. And I was told that Latinos were coming in to rape our women. I didn't see it happening in my neighborhood, but I believed it because I thought these people who had accepted me were smarter, and frankly, I wasn't willing to risk not being a part of that group by dissenting or asking questions. So I swallowed it. I swallowed it whole because it meant I belonged to something. And for a long time, I thought that what I was doing was saving the world. I really believed that all these ideas that they were giving me, these theories that now I know are conspiracy theories, were things that adults didn't even understand, and I had the inside track. I wasn't smart enough to question it. I wasn't brave enough to question it. And then 2 years later, here I am in this picture at 16 years old. The man who recruited me and all the other older skinheads had gone to, on the 49th anniversary of Kristallnacht, which is the anniversary when the SS soldiers went around Germany to break Jewish, owned shop windows and desecrate synagogues and grave sites. On the 49th anniversary of that in Chicago, this group did the same thing. They went around to Jewish-owned stores and broke windows. They spray-painted swastikas on synagogues, and they were not arrested for that. 2 weeks later, another event happened. They went to a female skinhead's house, a member of this group that I was a part of, and because they had seen her with a black man at a bus stop, they went to her apartment, they kicked in her door, they pistol whipped her until they thought they had killed her, and then they left, but not before painting a swastika on her wall with her own blood. Luckily, they were arrested for that and went to prison. Unlucky for me, at 16 years old, I was the last man standing as part of this group. I knew how to recruit people. I knew how to look for young people's vulnerabilities by this point. I knew the rhetoric, and I used it to indoctrinate people, mostly through fear. And suddenly, everybody that looked at me, that had come after me, looked at me as the leader of this organization, and I grabbed it. Because at that point, I was so addicted to the power, having been powerless for 14 years before that, this feeling of perceived power, because it wasn't real power, suddenly intoxicated me. And I decided to jump headfirst into what I saw as an opportunity. I still didn't know that what I was doing was wrong. But I had an inkling, because I wasn't raised that way. There was always something I had to suppress in order to belong, in order to feel that feeling of power. Next, please. And what happened over the next few years is I started to develop more innovative strategies to recruit young people. I decided that music was a powerful tool to attract young people. Music in general is just a powerful platform. It makes us feel a certain way or remember something from our past. And I knew that if I took this music and I focused on the grievances or even the perceived grievances of people, that I could recruit them. Next, please. So in 1992, after already having this band and spewing, hatred and white supremacist lyrics that were full of conspiracy theories against Jews and African Americans and anybody who wasn't white, essentially, I started to see young people become attracted to this. And before I knew it, there were hundreds of people from around my area who were coming to meetings, who were coming to concerts. It had become a social movement. And all these people with just this little brokenness in them were now being fulfilled by these empty promises that we were making. They were being manipulated. In 1992, next please. In 1992, I was in the first American skinhead white power band that traveled outside of the United States to Europe. The picture here was me singing on stage in front of 4,000 skinheads and white supremacists from all over Europe. It was a small town called Weimar in what was former East Germany, a town that is historic. It's produced composers, some of the best thinkers and artists and musicians. And after this concert, after I incited people into violence through my lyrics, it was the first time that I really recognized the power and the consequences of those words. Because after this concert, these 4,000 skinheads went out into this quaint, historic town, and they destroyed it. They broke into pubs and stole beer. They flipped over cars, and they started to beat up the townspeople, who, by the way, were German and white. And suddenly, I started to become very confused because I thought that our mission was to protect the white race and to eliminate the enemy who was non-white. And there was this dichotomy all of a sudden of confusion where I started to really question the people around me and the beliefs that we had. I started to snowball into that confusion after that because I had believed that these people were genuine. I believed that we were a family. But now I had started to realize that we had been fed lies to turn us against each other by people who were selfish and egotistical, who needed the control and manipulated others to do their bidding. And I had become one of those people. Next, when I came home from Germany from that trip, I met a girl and I fell in love. And she was not a part of the movement that I was a part of. In fact, she was against it. And it took me a long time to have her warm up to me, and finally she decided to go out on a date with me, and we spent a lot of time together. And we got married at 19 years old, and we had our first child. And suddenly, those three ideas of identity, community, and purpose became challenged. Was I a hate monger? Or was I a father and a husband? Was my community the one that I had physically given life to? Or was it the one I had surrounded myself to boost my own ego? And was my purpose to destroy the earth and everybody on it because that is what our intention was? Or was it to actually build a safe place for my family to thrive in? And I just got confused. I didn't know what to do. All I had known for those years leading up to my marriage and having my children were very focused on this identity, community, and purpose that I had known. And something had entered my life that I didn't understand. The love had come in and started to push out the hate, slowly. But that wasn't the end of it. That was just the beginning. In fact, I had hundreds of times when I would meet somebody, even before this, where it would just plant the seed in my head that maybe we were more similar and that fear was driving this. But again, because of the intoxication to power, I stayed in. Also, it was very hard to leave because I knew that if I left, I would be losing everything that I had. And I didn't want to go back to that 14-year-old powerless kid. Next, please. So my wires got crossed a little bit because I wasn't ready to abandon that identity, that community, and that purpose, even though I had a positive option to go to. So I talked to my wife, and I convinced her to let me open a record shop to sell the white power music that not only I was making, but I was now importing from Europe. And I promised her that I would get off the streets and that I would, not risk our family's well-being by being out there in public anymore. But I was still involved in the movement through this store. I was selling music that was promoting this ideology, and I was feeding it to other people, and I was planting seeds of hate. And though 75% of my revenue was from white power music, people were driving in from all over the country to buy it. This was before the internet. I still sold a small section of hip-hop music and punk rock and heavy metal. And that was mostly to appease the community, because if all I sold was white power music, well then, of course, they wouldn't want me there. And I never expected anybody to come in and buy it. I certainly wasn't interested in selling it to them, but I was happy to take their money if they came in. And they started to come in, despite it being a small community, despite them knowing how horrible the words were that I said and the violence that I committed was, they came in. They knew who I was. And they kept coming back. And at first I was very standoffish, but as they kept coming back, I felt more comfortable, and I started to have conversations. The first meaningful interactions that I had had with people outside of my social circle in my whole life. Because even before I was 14, I was in this bubble. I was protected. I still hadn't gone out and really interfaced with anybody. And now suddenly I was faced with this idea of actually having meaningful interactions and dialogue with the people I thought I hated. And one day, when a young black teen came in, and he was visibly upset. This was a customer that I'd had before, and I'd never spoken to him, but this time he was upset. And I asked him what was wrong. And he told me, confided in me, that his mother had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. And then suddenly I could relate, because my own mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and I saw that he felt the same pain that I felt. That wasn't the last time I saw him. And then other people came in who were Jewish and who were gay and who were Muslims and Asians, all people that I'd never wanted anything to do with, suddenly came in and started to show me compassion. In fact, they showed me compassion when I least deserved it. And they were the people that I least deserved it from. And what that did was it destroyed the demonization that I had for them in my head, the prejudice, and it fostered humanization. Suddenly I realized that I had much more in common with these people than I did with the folks I had surrounded myself with. And while we had differences, those differences were the flavor, the beauty, the music, the culture, food, all the things that I love. And I started to really feel connected. I became embarrassed to sell the white power music in front of my new friends, to the dismay of my community that I was still a part of, this white supremacist community. But I pulled it from the shelves because I couldn't in good conscience sell it, knowing what I knew. Unfortunately, the store had to close because it was 75% of my revenue. So I lost my job, my livelihood. I didn't have a great relationship with my family, even though they tried very, very hard. I used that as an opportunity to walk away from the movement. So I left my community. And at the same time, my wife and children left me because I hadn't left quickly enough. Next, please. And for the next 5 years, after I walked away from the movement, 1995, I suffered a depression that was very dark. And there were days, often these days happened, where I would wake up and wish that I hadn't woken up. I didn't know who I was anymore. I had abandoned the ideology, and I was fine with that. I was actually happy, but I still didn't have a new identity and a new community and a new purpose. I was lost again. In 1999, at the end of that 5 years, one of the few friends that I had came up to me, and she said, "I don't want you to die." And I said, "Okay, well, what do you suggest? Because I'm out of ideas." And she said, "Well, I just got this new job at this company called IBM. You should go apply for them." And I said, "You're crazy. Why would they hire me? I'm covered in Nazi tattoos. I got kicked out of 6 high schools, one of them twice, no college education, and I didn't own a computer." I thought she was crazy. But she convinced me, and I kind of, this went in knowing that I wasn't going to get the job just to appease her. But I got the job, and I was thrilled. For the first time in my life, I felt as though I had the opportunity to do something meaningful with my life. And I was even more excited when they told me that I would be setting up computers and a network at a school district. I said, "Okay, I can learn something. I can learn a new skill." And then the next sentence came out of their mouth, and they said, "Your first job is going to be at District 218, the same school district I'd been kicked out of twice." You can call it karma or destiny or God's will or fate. On my first day at work, as I was trembling like a nervous schoolboy going to school on his first day, thinking for sure that somebody was going to point me out and say, there's that Nazi, get him out of here, you're fired, and I'd lose everything. On that first day, as I'm crawling through like the dark hallways, avoiding, to be seen, who walks by me but the old black security guard, Mr. Holmes, Mr. Johnny Holmes, who I'd gotten in a fist fight with that got me kicked out for the second time. I had no idea what to do. I was terrified. Because for 5 years, I had tried to outrun my past. I was afraid of being judged the same way that I judged others. I didn't feel like I had that self-esteem anymore. So I didn't know what to do. But I decided that I had to do something because I couldn't live like this. And I didn't know what I was going to say, but I decided I was going to chase after him and talk to him. And I found him in the parking lot as he was getting into his car. And I tapped him on the shoulder. And when he turned around and he recognized me, he took a step back because he was afraid. This was a man who I'd physically assaulted, tormented, made his life hell, as well as everybody else in that school. And he extended his hand, and I just said, I'm sorry. And we talked, and we embraced. We may have cried a little bit. It was a long time ago. I don't forget. I don't remember. But he told me, and we talked, and he had such wise words, and he forgave me. And I don't know what he saw, but he made me promise one thing. He said, you have to tell your story. And I don't think it was because, there was a fear of young kids going into white supremacist groups. I think he understood that it was the story of every young person who's searching for something and finds it in really dark places because they may have hit a wall. Next, please. That's Mr. Johnny Holmes right there. I had the opportunity after 15 years, after that day, to be reconnected with him just recently, last month. And I have to say he's one of the wisest, most kindest individuals I've ever met. For somebody to have compassion and empathy for me, somebody who had hurt him, I know takes a lot to do. But he changed my life. He saved my life, really. Because had he judged me differently, my life could have possibly taken a turn for the worse. And I may not be here today. So I'm very grateful to him for having that compassion for me. Next, please. I didn't know how to keep my promise to him initially. I was scared. But I started to tell my story, and eventually it turned into my book. And I have some copies here that I'm happy to give you for free. You can take one if there are enough for everybody. It took me 10 years to write that book. I was out speaking. I was out talking to young people, but I didn't really have a focus. I didn't know what I was doing. I just, would meet people who I thought were in a bad place and just share my story and didn't really have a message for them. I didn't have a mission. I was telling them that they were wrong, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't work. More often than not, it didn't work because I would try and debate them with the new facts that I had, and they were so cemented in their facts that it didn't work. Sometimes it even pushed them further away. Next, please. Mo? There you go. But eventually, I started to understand that it wasn't just my story, but it was important to listen. This picture here, I always get this question, so I wanted to put it up. I have reconnected with my family. My boys are now 25 and 23 years old. I'm remarried now for 13 years, and I'm very good friends with my ex-wife, and I have a wonderful relationship with my family. My mother hasn't learned how to text message yet, so I'm okay. She's gotten on Facebook, and that's interesting. And I've always taught my children, because they were 3 and 1 when they left. I've always taught them to understand that their opinion isn't the only opinion that matters, that they need to listen. and they've grown up to be really wonderful individuals. I'm very proud of them. Maurice, next, please. I want to talk a little bit about white supremacy and what I've seen happen over the last 30 years. This is what it was in my day, and I think when we think of maybe prior to August 12th, what we think about when we talk about white supremacy is this: skinheads and swastikas and the Klansmen. And unfortunately, 30 years ago, we recognized that this look, that this image, was turning away even the average white American racist. We were too edgy. So 30 years ago, we decided to tell our people, we can't do this anymore. We need to grow our hair out. We need to trade in our boots for suits. We need to go to college campuses to recruit where young people are forming new opinions. They're looking for communities to belong to. And they're confused because they're also looking for that identity, community, and purpose. We told people to get jobs in law enforcement, to go to the military and get training, and to run for office. I have to be honest, I never thought it would work. But here we are, 30 years later. Next, Maurice. And that's exactly what has happened. I'm sorry to show this picture because I know how much pain it brings to this community. But I think it's important to show that this movement here that we see is the same hateful white supremacist movement that I was a part of 30 years ago. Maybe the message is a little bit more palatable, not much. But they've realized that they need to change their look, their message slightly, to be able to appeal to those same people they wanted to recruit. So they've now become dentists and lawyers and doctors and teachers, and they're blending in, and it's become normalized. It's very difficult to identify these people unless they open their mouths, or unless we see their policies or their actions. Next, please. And the movement now also looks like this. Perhaps like our daughters, the cheerleaders at the high school, friends. It has become a social movement that has permeated into the fabric of our country more so than it had already permeated. Because we have a history of 250 years of white supremacy in this country. And now, because of the conditions, we're starting to see young people become very active in this movement. But if you think about it, I don't want to say it's easy to understand why, but the conditions that contribute to it are something we're all aware of. Young people can't afford college. And if they can, they're saddled with debt. There aren't jobs for young people after college. And frankly, we're living in a society where our leaders are the ones feeding us the fear rhetoric. So who is leading us? Who is giving us a vision of what we can be? Not a whole lot of people right now. When the adults are confused, imagine how confused the young people are. And they're looking for answers. I'm not appeasing. I'm not trying to sympathize with them. I'm just trying to tell you what I've seen so that we can flip the tables and change it. Next, please. I put this picture up because I often say that nobody is born with a swastika flag under their pillow or an ISIS flag. And although some are, the truth is the vast majority are not. It's a learned behavior. It's something that they adopt because they want to be part of something. I've worked with hundreds of people, but I've helped over 100 people disengage from the movement. And every time I ask them, and I always make sure and ask because I'm very curious about it, is what led you there? Why? Their answer is, I just wanted to belong to something. Next, please. The internet has played a major part in what's happening today. There are people actively recruiting, like that man in that alley did for me, But because it was face-to-face then, because we didn't have the internet, now because of the internet, it's become much easier to flood with propaganda, with conspiracy theory, with fear rhetoric that makes people afraid. And if they don't have a whole lot already to begin with, or if they're broken, and they've started to go down a dark path, it's easy to blame somebody else for those problems. The same way that I was told that it was everybody else's fault that I was miserable, that people were taking something away from me. And it was easy to understand that because I felt as though I didn't have a whole lot. It was easier to blame somebody else for that than to internalize and try to understand that, maybe I was the one causing those problems. Next, please. So the movement and the internet, this is the new face of it. It is the young person that lives in all of our communities. Perhaps there's mental illness. Perhaps there's abuse or trauma. But the result of that is somebody walking into a church because of the information, the garbage, the false lies, the conspiracy theories that they're fed, decide to go out and harm other people. Next, please. We're dark. Next, please. Okay, I'm going to skip that slide. So what I've done, because I understand that young people are broken, they're searching for something, is I've started to listen very closely. Rather than speak, rather than debate, rather than argue, I understand that I need to listen for something that I call potholes. Those things that appear in our life's path that just deviate us. And if we don't have the right support, don't have the right guidance, sometimes we get stuck in those potholes, or they detour us down a very dark path. When I listen, I hear those potholes. Like I said earlier, I don't debate, because there's really no debating logic with something that's illogical. And frankly, those words that they use to debate are words that I was involved in making up from the very beginning. I'm not interested in hearing that. What I'm interested in is getting beyond that and listening to what led them to that. And I hear about trauma, abuse, addiction, mental illness, neglect, even extreme privilege. And what I do is I become a pothole filler. I provide services to people through partners that help build their resilience. Job training, career counseling, life coaching, mental health therapy, tattoo removal. Because what I've found is that when people feel better about themselves, when they're more self-confident, there's less of a need to blame that mysterious other. They're now accountable. But I don't let them slide on the ideology. I do challenge them. And the way I do that is by introducing them to people that they think that they hate. Because 9.5 times out of 10, they've never had that meaningful interaction before. Hatred is born of ignorance. Fear is its father, and isolation is its mother. I try to connect them to humanity. This is Daryl. Daryl, when he contacted me, was 31 years old. He had just been discharged from the military before he was sent to Afghanistan, and he was really angry about it because he hated Muslims and he wanted to kill them. He contacted me after he read my book, and he wasn't really happy with the way it ended because, of course, I left the movement, and he was disappointed. But he had been recruited in the military by some skinheads, and he wanted to talk to me because he couldn't understand why I didn't hate Muslims. And one of the first questions I asked him when I talked to him was, have you ever met a Muslim? He said, no. Why would I want to do that? I hate them. They hate me. They want to kill me, and I want to kill them. I said, okay. So I excused myself when I was at his house in upstate New York, and I went to the bathroom, and I got out my phone and very quietly Googled the local mosque. And I got on the phone and I said to the imam who picked it up, Imam, I have a Christian man here who would really love to learn more about your religion. Do you mind if we stop by? And he said, yes, of course, but I don't have much time. I'm preparing for, prayer service, but come on over. I told Daryl we were going out for lunch, and about halfway to the mosque, I said, we have to stop somewhere first. And I said, we're going to the mosque. And he said, no, pull over. He felt physically sick. He wanted to throw up. And after some talking and challenging him, I said, we'll go. And if you want to leave, we leave. When we got to the mosque, I knocked on the door, and the imam answered. And because we had this, discussion, we were late. And he said, I only have 15 minutes, but you're welcome to come in. 2.5 hours later, after sitting around a table, with discussion and crying and hugging, Daryl recognized that really there weren't many differences between his Christian religion and the Muslim religion. And they very weirdly bonded over Chuck Norris for some reason. I don't know why, but they did. Next, please. I'm very happy to say that on any given Friday, you can find both Daryl and the imam eating falafel at the local stand. They're now very good friends. Daryl is still a Christian, but he goes to the mosque to help his friend set up chairs when they have events or to cook food, and he brings his wife and his baby. And he has now realized that there is nothing to fear. He's made this connection. He's been able to humanize what he saw as the enemy and realize they have much more in common than he thought. Next, please. Like I mentioned earlier, I've helped hundreds of people, and I've used the same technique over and over and over again, and nearly every time it's worked. The combination of making people more resilient, giving them something to hope for, and also connecting them to the people that they think that they hate is very transformative. The same way it was for me when the people that I least deserved compassion from gave it to me. And I'm not saying that it is the victim's responsibility to show compassion to the people that hate them. It's all of our responsibility to show compassion and empathy for everybody. Because I know that what I do is a Band-Aid. I know that I'm just pulling people out who are already in, who've already damaged other people. What I need and what I hope for is that we can get to a place where we can empathize and put ourselves in the shoes of other people and understand their pain. And that sometimes, though it's awkward and sometimes painful, it's something we all need to do. Next, please. These are all pictures of people that I've helped, some who prefer to stay anonymous, but next. This is Jason from Seattle, who I met, who a couple of years ago was a violent skinhead, hurt people in his community, and when he reached out to me, he was struggling. Didn't have a lot of money, had just gotten out of prison, wanted to go back to his old ways, but something inside of him made him reach out to me. At first, he was arguing with me, but I could tell that just by reaching out to me, he had something to say and that I had to listen. I'm happy to say that he's been out for now several years, and he's built his own nonprofit in Seattle to help other people disengage. So it's been paid forward. Next, please. In fact, all over the world, there are former extremists trying to help other people not go down the same path that they did. In this picture are people from probably 24 countries all over the world who are helping people through their own stories, through their own experiences, now off-ramp from that path that they're on. Next. I'd like to offer some insight on some strategies that I think are effective. There are two things that extremists and Nazis love: silence and violence. If we are silent, if we ignore them, if we pretend that it doesn't exist or don't have the courage to be vocal about it, we sweep it under the rug and believe that we've been living in a post-racial society. Well, they grow, they thrive because they're unfettered. They can just infect people at will. So we cannot be silent. We have to be vocal. They also love violence. In fact, that is their number one intention when they go to progressive communities like Charlottesville. In fact, they only go to progressive communities because they go there to elicit a response. That's their intention. They don't march in their own neighborhoods. They don't march among their own communities of people that are like-minded. They go to communities that would be outraged by them marching because they know that what's happening in Charlottesville with the good people now starting to attack each other based on different views of how to handle the situation will happen. Mission accomplished for them. What I'd like to see happen is what happened in Boston just a few weeks after Charlottesville. This is a couple of dozen neo-Nazis who decided to, have a free speech or a rally to remove a monument. And let me just tell you, it is not about a monument. It is not about free speech. It is about them intentionally coming here to provoke you. And I know this because I used to do it. Over and over and over. That's the MO. It gets them attention, it enrages good people who are peaceful, and it turns you all against each other after they leave. They come in and they plant the seeds and they leave. They were very effective here, partly because of the political environment we're in, where we may have people at the very top who are using the same fear rhetoric, the same conspiracy theories to recruit people and make them afraid so that we turn against each other. They do the same thing. But these couple dozen neo-Nazis marching, next please, elicited a response where nearly 20,000 people from Boston came out to protest them. Now, Charlottesville is not Boston, and I don't know that 20,000 people would come out. But I do know that there are a lot of good people here who don't know what to do, don't know what to say, maybe don't have it in them to be protesters or activists, but they want to do something, especially now that they've seen it happen in their communities. Next, please. What these people did, these 20,000 people, they surrounded them. They became visible, but they did not adopt their tactics. They did not attack them physically, but they were vocal and they were visible. And they said to them, just by this sheer force of number, we see you, we hold you accountable, we don't want what you're doing in our community, but if you want to leave and exit what you're a part of, here's a path. And we will be back here every time you come back. And we will be just as vocal and just as visible. There were no arrests, or very few arrests, during that rally. The community of Boston is still intact. They haven't fought with each other about differing points of view. And while we all have tools to use, and we may all have different tools in our arsenal, we have to find a way to make sure that those tools that we have don't marginalize other good people in the community who now might be afraid because of violence or because of inaction that's coming from people. When they came here and marched, their goal was to divide you, to make you afraid, and then to leave and watch you eat each other alive. And I think to some degree, from what I've heard from most of the community members, is that's what's happening, is that there are different points of view, different ways that people want to combat this, and some want to be violent, and some want to ignore it, some want to legislate against it. I think the effective way to do this is somewhere in the middle. The community needs to come together and show unity and not adopt the violent tactics that they are hoping that you use. Because they then turn that narrative around and they become the victims. They now can claim that their free speech has been taken away. Because who's going to argue with that? They win a lot of hearts and minds over because of that. Because they're not telling anybody that they went in with the intention of being violent. They went in saying this was a free speech rally. We're just trying to unite the right. That was not their intention. Their intention was to leave you reeling. And they've done that. My hope is that we can at least listen to each other. Even though we may have different viewpoints on how to handle this situation, that we at least can come together and allow voices to be heard. Not them, you. You guys need to come together. Despite what some people may think about the law enforcement community here and how they may have contributed to it, they also need to be part of this discussion. 3 people tragically lost their lives that day. 3 people that couldn't go home to their families, who went to work that morning or went to hang out with their friends thinking ahead of what they could do next week or with their lives or how their passions were going to come to fruition. And they can't anymore. And they caused that. But they're also causing you to disintegrate internally. If I can offer you any advice, it is to listen. Listen to them individually and see what a young person who has gone down that path may need to leave. Because I can tell you that ideology and dogma are not what drive people to those groups. That comes later. That's the tie that binds them all together. That's the license and the vehicle for them to be violent and to exert their anger onto other people because they hate themselves so much that they need to throw their pain onto others so that they don't have to deal with it. I know this because I did it. Use this opportunity to become stronger, more unified, not to let them win. Because they didn't just win when they marched. They're winning a year later because the community is broken. It's shattered. And while people want to do good, you're not listening to each other anymore. Sit down with law enforcement. Sit down with Black Lives Matters. Sit down with Surge. Sit down with all the groups and all the citizens who are involved in this and find the common thread. And the common thread is you don't want this in your community anymore. But then figure out how you can work together. Because when they divide you, they win. Next, please. I just want to leave you with one challenge. And it's something that I try and do every day as much as I possibly can, and I hope that you will too. Is please find somebody that you think does not deserve your compassion and give it to them. Because I guarantee you that they're the ones who could use it the most. Thank you very much. I'd love to just have a discussion, take questions. We can do this very informally, but I really want your input. The last thing I want to do is come here and prescribe a solution. This is not my community. I support this community. I'm here if you need me, but nobody knows this community like you folks do. And I understand that there may be, differing opinions. They're all welcome here. But what's also needed is respect for each other. So if anybody has anything to say, I would love to hear what you have to say. Maybe there's something I haven't talked about that you'd like to learn more about. But ultimately, I want us to just be able to have awkward conversations in a civil way. Because I think that that's something that's desperately lacking now. But we also have to acknowledge that there are some people that are angry. And it's okay to be angry. What matters is how we express that anger, how we can turn that into a positive instead of feeding into the problem more. So if anybody has any questions, I'd love to take them. I think we have a microphone over here that we can hand out. Somebody had their hand up? Sure. You pass that down there. Thank you.
The 14-year-old you, okay, you were very insecure, looking for an identity and so on. Why did you end up with the supremacists and not an urban gang and not fundamentalist Christians or whatever? Why that? Was it merely that they approached you, or?
That's a really great question. I could have gone down any of those paths. There's really no difference why somebody from Middle America decides to fly to Syria and join ISIS, or why they join a white supremacist movement. I believe I was a product of my environment. These people lived in my neighborhood. They were, right across the alley from where I spent my time. If a baseball coach or ballerinas would have been across the alley, perhaps I could have been the greatest ballet dancer on earth. Unfortunately, that's not the case, nor do you want to see me dance. But that's why it's so important that as adults, we recognize we're failing young people. We are failing them. We are not identifying and helping the most vulnerable people. Young people are idealistic, they're passionate, they're smart, and while they may not be as mature because of life experience, they want to be heard. They don't want to be talked to. And they often have something very important to say that's maybe not as jaded as some of our opinions. And it is our job to support young people and to offer them opportunity so that they don't go down that path. From day one, we should be identifying vulnerable people, not after the fact. Because what I do is like digging sand out of a hole. It just keeps filling in. What we can do as human beings, as Americans, is identify and recognize that our youngest are our future and our most vulnerable at the same time. And we need to support them. There are neighborhoods in Chicago where I live, urban neighborhoods, that have zero opportunity. There aren't grocery stores. The police push them in as though they're living in a prison without walls. They live 2 miles from Navy Pier in Chicago with a beautiful lake and museums. And they often don't know they're there because they are not allowed to leave their neighborhoods. Because people like me come in and gentrify and push them in. There's no opportunity. I would say the same thing about many rural areas where young people don't have opportunity, where they may be isolated, where they may be afraid or may not think that they have a future. We need to do a better job of identifying the vulnerable and offering them everything that we can to support their passions. I think we should have, youth incubators in cities. We should be thinking about how to invest in them, because I believe we're failing them right now. Yes?
I loved the pictures of what happened in Boston. But of course the numbers are very different.
Of course.
That was more comparable to what happened in July when there was a very small number of KKK folks. And they were surrounded by the community basically saying, we don't want you here, but it was not, the vibration still, especially for people who were close to them, was often very hostile and confrontive. I don't know how we work within our community for those who feel that need to yell back. I mean, because that obviously only exacerbates the oppositional behavior. And what you said about the Boston folks, I don't know what actually happened, but if there were a way to say, you don't need to do this anymore. We're here. I don't know how you can even do that in a mass setting, but to convey that message seems so much more positive and hopeful. So the split in Charlottesville has sometimes been just that, like people who feel compelled to be I guess, express their frustration.
Sure.
And there are also many, I mean, I was not at August 12th, but there were many who were willing to hold the peaceful
Sure.
position. The Quakers were fantastic, you know.
Well,
But
yep, sorry.
it's, the whole clergy collective was largely doing that, although there were some who were also very confrontive in July, I know that. But that's a tension in this response that I don't know how to best deal with. It's your description of Boston was very benign, but it's a lot easier when there's a very few of them.
Sure.
And a huge number of...
there's some people who
Go ahead.
maybe want to respond to that.
Yeah, I wanted to offer a little bit of pushback. Oh,
Sure.
all right, yeah. Hi, I'm Jelaine. I'm an activist here in town. I wanted to offer some pushback to what you said about,
Sure.
you know, that everybody needs to offer compassion to these people. I mean, you, as at least a white presenting guy, are better positioned to do that than
Sure.
me, a queer woman of color.
Sure.
You know, that puts myself in danger, so I'm not going to take... I mean, I'm glad you're doing your work. I want to say that, we're on the same side, glad you're doing it. But I'm just concerned about the rhetorical uses to which your work gets put, all right? Like here in Charlottesville, in other words, that it's very individualized. You know, you're going and making these interventions one-on-one with these guys, and we know white supremacy is a system,
Yes.
you know, over
Very much
centuries.
so.
Yeah. You know, and I'm glad you're doing it, but we need a mixed toolbox, I would say, you know, that includes direct action, not violence, you know. And I would say that, you know, the violence on the side of the counter-protesters, it was infinitesimally small compared to that which was coming from the other side. So this
But they
whole
magnify it.
both sides
Right.
narrative is just, you know, it's just not true, you
Right.
know. But I'm just concerned about how your work, and, you know, I love your work, but the rhetorical uses to which other people put your work to impugn and use as a cudgel against those of us who advocate direct action, which I see as part of a toolbox. And also, the Boston situation was great because the police really set up a perimeter. You know, they did their work, you know, and it didn't happen here. You know, the last time I was here in this church, the mayor, the police chief, and the pastor of this church stood up there where you are and told us all not to come out. And that was the message we were getting from on high, from all the officials. Don't come out, don't protest them, just ignore them. You're just feeding the flames, et cetera, et cetera. And so then this you know, the work that you do, or the work that Daryl Davis does, or that film, you know, Unlikely Friendship, this kind of one-on-one, you know, kumbaya, let's be friends, you know, it gets used against us. You know, so what do you say about that?
Well, I believe in direct action. I believe that we have to show up and be vocal and be seen. But I also believe that direct action shouldn't be violent. I've never in the history of my life, or, you know, what I've seen, you know, throughout all this and even before that, there's never been an instance where a white supremacist has changed his mind because he was punched in the face or hit with a bottle. It just doesn't happen. In fact, that pushes them further away down their hole, makes them angrier and more violent. When I say this, I want you to really take it with a grain of salt. I will be the first person with my fists and my guns if the Nazis come marching wanting to kill every single one of us and it's a war. I will be there. But I also know that that is not the time now. That we're still in a place where people are doing this because, for the most part, I do believe that there are many, who are pulling the strings who want to kill people. They come here with the intention, maybe not even of killing the enemy, but offering up their own, hoping that their own die. I got this insight from a very special person, and I'm glad she gave it to me. But they come here willing to offer up their own so that they become the victims. They don't care about their own people. But what I would say is there are many tools in the toolbox, and not everybody has the ability to have compassion towards somebody, because I understand the anger. I get it.
Well, it's also the risk. I can't do that.
The risk, yes, no, of course. What I'm suggesting is not necessarily just having compassion for the Nazis, having compassion for everybody so that they don't grow up feeling a lack of it. so that they don't feel the need to go into these extremist movements. And that's something everybody can do.
It's not just what you do, it's what you feel in your heart. It has an effect. If we can clean ourselves out of hate, it has a huge effect. We don't even need to do anything.
Well, that's, again, this individualized response. You know?
But you don't. But it is not ultimately an individualized response. It's the work that we do internally to move past hatred, to come into the love that is available, and the spiritual level of that love is profoundly moving to many, many people. I was at Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. When that man spoke, you could say he was an individual man, but he transformed that crowd. I was personally had a spiritual experience of the oneness of all humanity that has never left, and I never can approach anyone anymore since that transformative experience. And I know that to the extent that I can radiate what Dr. King evoked in me, it has a tremendous impact. So I'm just saying each of us needs to do that inner work.
In that direct action, that's what he did. But there were a lot of people here in town that were quoting MLK that were telling us not to use his tactics out in the street. It's like, they love to quote Martin Luther King, but don't go out there in the street.
And we've learned that silence and violence is what they're looking for.
And I would say,
Sure. She had the microphone, and then you can hand it back to
I'll
her.
hand it back to you in just a second. I would say that to anyone, if you can find it in yourself to say, I need to find the compassion for the white supremacists because of the isolation and the pain and all of that they're feeling, but you can't yet find it in yourself to meet people who are on the left
That's
and
true.
are pushing your comfort levels also, and you're saying are meeting that with anger, like you need to find inside yourself how to meet, and I don't want to say both sides, but I don't know how else to say it, but you need, the counter-protesters, you need to find a way to say, I need to hear their anger and their pain and not tone police them and tell them that the way they're doing that is wrong.
I really think that that's a wonderful point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, amen. Hi, I am Charlottesville born and bred. This is my community. I was gone from it for a time, and I'm back, I think, for such time as these. When we talk, this is thank you for giving us this opportunity, because the truth of the matter is Charlottesville does not really talk. We've gone through a phase where we're screaming at each other, but we have to understand that we live in bodies, and bodies have responses that are going to take place, whether our hearts and our spirits want them to happen or not. They happen. It's like hearing. Hearing is physiological. We think about, it's physiological. The process of hearing goes like this, and if you're a preacher or someone who speaks in public, you need to know about the physiology of hearing. Folk tune into you for the first few minutes, and then they go to Mars. And then they come back and say, oh, what's she talking about? They go, oh.
I hope y'all didn't do that today.
And then we go to Jupiter. Yeah. And then we come back again. Oh, is she still on point? Oh, and we take one more trip, and then we come back to see you wrap it up. And so if I'm developing a sermon or a speech, I keep in mind the physiology of hearing. I got to say it at least 3 times, 3 different ways, so that most folk will hear me. When it comes to violence and abuse in the community, number one, as you very well said, we cannot police other people's responses. Because, see, what I hate as an African American is white folk telling me I need to get over the pain of slavery, because I live with the legacy of it every freaking day. So you don't get to tell me that, because you don't know what you're talking about, any more than I know what it is for you to be a white man. I don't know that, but never in my life have I presumed that I could tell you how to do that, because that's lunacy, as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to wrap this up. I'm trying to get a lot in. Part of what's wrong with our conversation is that people who think they have power or money or space decide they're going to design how it is we react to whatever there is coming down the pike. Newsflash, you don't get to do that. How do I know? Can I give you an example? Our city council meetings. They're horrible, but they're necessary. Because folks who have not been able to talk, who have not been listened to the point that we are in yet another gentrification in this area, which is now pushing out native Charlottesvillians so that frappe drinking college people can live in the houses, in the communities that we were born in. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't mind if you live next to me. What I mind is if I got to move me and mine out to make room for you. There's something unjust about that, which gets me to my final point. We are dealing with old systemic injustice in this place. And when human beings deal with injustice, we have visceral reactions. And I don't care how, I'm a pastor. I'm very spiritual on one level, but dagnabbit, I'm a human being in a human body, and I have responses to those things that are impinging upon my physical self, and my spiritual self says, no! I think I'm done.
Thank you for your passionate response. I really appreciate that, and I hear you. We need to fix our institutional and systemic racism. We need to overhaul it, really, because it hasn't changed very much from when our country was founded almost 250 years ago by white supremacists. Our education system needs to be overhauled. There are not, I mean, in the neighborhood that I was talking about that I live very close to, there isn't public transportation that arrives to those neighborhoods that allows people to even leave to go to jobs. So I hear you, and I think you're right. But I think we also have to learn empathy so that we can understand, at least in part, what somebody else might be going through. Absolutely. I stopped being loud 22 years ago. No, that's okay. You do your thing. I really appreciate that, and I think, you know, there were a lot of really important comments in that. We do need to listen to people that we see as different. We can't just say we're an ally without understanding what those people have gone through, what they deal with on a daily basis. So even as empathetic people, we need to have empathy for the people that we align ourselves with to understand them, not just the enemies. I wasn't suggesting, you know, that. But thank you. That was, I think the loudness in the voice really portrays the frustration from so much of this community, and I thank you for that.
Okay. I'm Pastor Brenda Brown Grooms' co-pastor, so I'm the gentler one. I wanted to just quieter one, not so gentle, that it's 400 years. Actually, it's 400 years in 1619 when the first slave ship landed in Jamestown. And also to ask you what part of your faith changed, how did your faith work with your transformation, your relationship with God work with your transformation from white supremacy to equality?
Thank you. Good question. I was raised a Catholic. I went to Catholic school from 1st to 8th grade. I even went to a couple of Catholic high schools, and I lost my faith. I lost my belief in religion, but not necessarily spirituality or God. I believe that what God is our connection to each other, that we are the individual cells in the body of God, and that when we're sick, God is sick. That when we can't connect with each other, that body fails. So if we want to be healthy, if we want, and I'm not a religious person. I am not, and I don't even feel guilty about that. No. But, you know, I would consider myself a spiritual agnostic. I don't think that I'm smart enough to understand what's out there, but I have faith that there's something bigger than me, and that is all of us. And I hope that we can find a way to build a healthy body again. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your vulnerability and your willingness to share your story. I just wanted to comment how much I appreciate you throwing in, I think on a couple of occasions, ISIS and this awareness that the tactics, the recruitment, the causes that lead these young men and women into that movement are the same. And that's why we're seeing similar behavior, and it's just a really important connection for us to make. So thank you, and also thank you for your comment about cells in the body of God. I've been saying that for years.
Thank you. And I just want to add on to your point, and most people may not know this because, you know, government and sometimes media really amplify this message, but white supremacists are responsible for twice as many terrorist attacks since 9/11 than any foreign or domestic terrorist group combined by a factor of 2. And in fact, if we really want to go back 400 years, million times more than any ISIS member, you know, could do. So that's something we need to recognize. And until we call these acts terrorism, we're not going to get the resources, we're not going to get the attention we need to combat it. Because people think, oh, it's just a couple of people. It's not just a couple of people. A couple of people may show up to these rallies with, you know, pretty haircuts and nice clothes, but that's not who's out there. We know that this has infiltrated every community, that there are people in every community in our country that is a believer in this hateful ideology, whether they may be a Nazi or a white supremacist, and I will not use the terms alt-right and white nationalist because I recognize those are their words, that they sat in a room and said, what can we call ourselves to make ourselves seem less hateful? We used to do that. We were white pride. Nobody can argue with that. We were white separatists. We don't want to hurt anybody. I'm sorry, but that's not what we talked about behind closed doors, and I guarantee you that's not what they talk about behind closed doors too. We need to call them what they are. The same level of terrorism that exists coming in across our borders is already here. There's an estimated 200,000 armed militiamen, sovereign citizens, who are the vast majority are white supremacists in nature, training in our country to overthrow the government, to kill Jews and black people. If there were 20 ISIS members, we would drop a bomb on them in any city in America without skipping a beat, just like we did in Tulsa in the early 1900s, and just like we did in Philadelphia in the 1980s. Right?
Yeah.
I don't see that happening to, you know, militia, patriots. They're not patriots. They want to destroy what we can build in this country. We haven't realized the American dream because not every American has been realized. We can't do that. We have to understand that unless we have fairness, equality, and justice for everybody, you're all not getting fairness, equality, and justice. That it's still just a few people with the money and the power that are pulling the strings of everybody. So don't be fooled. Just because we may have privilege, we may be comfortable, there are people that need our help, that need our voices, that need us to stand with them, but not walk in and say, this is how I think you should fix it. I want to go in and say, how can I help you? Tell me what to do. Elect black women. Elect politicians of color. Change the system and vote. Get out there and be visible and be vocal and tell them they're not welcome. But the minute we attack them, they win. The minute we're physical with them, we're giving them exactly what they want. And they're going to keep coming back and keep coming back because they're going to keep getting it. Yes, sir.
So I hear what you're saying about compassion toward the followers. I'm interested in the leaders.
I'm saying compassion for everybody.
Everybody, gotcha. But you were a leader, and you went through this transformative experience. And I find myself caught on the individual who keeps coming back and leading people to come back, who's got some kind of issue with Charlottesville, who's working out some kind of personal agenda.
Jason Kessler, I believe
Yes.
we're talking about. Call it by its name.
Okay, thank you. I find not only can I not find any empathy, because he keeps rubbing the wound raw, but I cannot identify a strategy for countering it.
Well, those people need to be held accountable. The people who are pulling the strings, who are manipulating the others, who are actively planning these things need to be held accountable. I have empathy for them, but I'm not willing to give them a pass. I'm not here telling you to give anybody a pass.
How can we hold him accountable for what he's doing to this community?
This is your community. I can't tell you how to do that. But what I can tell you is the more we give him attention, the more we give him a platform, the more he's going to continue to do that, because that is his goal. If he wants to march, we live in a country where that's his right to do that. But it's not his right to incite people into violence and murder. And for that, he needs to be held accountable.
So I just moved here March 1st.
There's no better time to come.
And first of all, I want to say that I think there's a difference between a community that is torn apart and not talking or doing things, and a community that is in a season of lament. Mm-hmm. People cannot move to healing fast. They have a right to be in a season of mourning, mourning. Mm-hmm. And so what I have observed and heard and experienced within my own congregation and in the community are people that are so uncomfortable with being uncomfortable that they want to rush to premature healing that will not work.
It's superficial.
So I think we have to be willing to sit in that. And the people who have taught me the most about how to do that are people of color. And it's white people that are so uncomfortable because this finally came to their front door and faces, ours, when the people of color in Charlottesville have been dealing with this for a very long time, and the season of MLK did not change it. And he and Malcolm at points worked together, and you cannot talk about one without the other. So I think there's this denial. I think what happens is that white people have been privileged enough to be shielded because we've been able to walk in a world that we have not. We've walked maybe on the same sidewalk, but with very different shoes and regulations. The other thing that I've observed in the community and have witnessed, and what happens in many communities around the world, is people who feel the most vulnerable, that the people who are entrusted to protect them when they do not, and they are being attacked, then need to do self-defense and have a sense of agency to protect themselves. So while I agree totally with I won't be silent, I will not be violent, violence can be defined in a variety of ways. And so there were many of my colleagues who were protected because of people who stepped in the middle and protected them. So there is a prophetic call to take the embodiment of one's spirituality and faith and put it on the line. So there's a difference in a posture of people that come with the intent to do the violence. There's another thing with people who are willing to take the strikes but also defend and resist. And I think that there are nuances to what we're talking about. And so we're still talking in linear terms, binary terms. And I don't think that that's going to be necessarily helpful. I'll stop with this. As a pastor, I have experienced a lot of people in my lifetime, and as a pastor, seeing very vulnerable people who have not been loved and who've been seriously abused in their lives, and they have not chosen the path of being in movements that bring harm and damage and violence to other people. So I'm grateful for your transformation. I want to say that.
Thank you.
It's, in my world, we call it resurrection.
My name's Christian, by the way.
I'm glad for that. I celebrate that, and I hope you have much success, more success with the one-on-one relationships, because I do think relationships matter. I'm somebody who was very judgmental about Antifa and people who were anarchists. And I was a college chaplain for 10 years before I came here. And it was the college students that came and say, "Hey, Rev, now we got to talk." And this was a liberal arts school with a lot of people that had a lot of means. And they transformed how I saw other. So because of my life experiences, violence is a trigger for me. I don't care who's doing it. But what they helped me do is breathe and really look and see the bigger picture. And so I appreciate the people that are willing to prophetically put their bodies on the line and embody that. Because as a Christian, some of us believe we are following someone who did just that. And so that's just all I want to say. And give us more, and I think we have to give each other a lot more credit. And because we're here. And I think we also have to be kind and compassionate with each other to sit where we are. And, you know, to have a mother who lost her child on that day sit in this room, you know, her daughter embodied what it means.
Yes.
So I don't want the people who've been victimized to be re-victimized.
I hear you, and I want to say thank you for that. A couple things. I'm not a pacifist. I will defend myself, and as should everybody here. There is a difference between attacking somebody mindlessly and defending yourself. Antifa is not new to me. Variations of Antifa have been happening for 30 years. I understand that they're not communist terrorists like they're being painted. I know this. But I also do know that there are some people in those organizations, very few, minuscule, like you said, that are maybe just as broken as those neo-Nazis that are using anger as an outlet. Because I've seen it happen. In my day, we had people go back and forth from neo-Nazi to anti-racist, neo-Nazi to anti-racist, because we would shun them, they would shun them, and it didn't matter about ideology, they just wanted to fight. Come to my church. But no, I mean, I think what you said was great. The only thing I would caution is to say that white people overgeneralizing are the problem, because there are a lot of allies. And while I recognize, I don't know if everybody else does, we created these problems and it's our responsibility to fix them. There are many people who are not complicit in it now. So I just want to say that. Okay, well, I just repeated what you said then. Somebody over here?
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you so much for bringing up lament, because I think us as a community, especially as an African-American community, we don't take time to lament, and we are just expected to heal. So I appreciate that. I appreciate Mrs. Heyer and the Heyer family for your compassion, for your love for people. I find it interesting that you said you're a spiritual agnostic, yet the cover of your presentation is of the Clergy Collective.
Oh, that was at the cover of my presentation.
Okay, well, that was the first screen.
I think it was just the image for the event.
Okay, and the flyer itself.
Yes.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So I have a statement and then I have a question.
Sure.
My statement is, as a spiritual agnostic, I just invite you to spend time, just as much time as you're giving in the compassion and the love and the transformation that you've gone through, that you search yourself deeper, because agnosticism is I think, a way of screaming to say that there is a healer, that there is a protector, and there is something greater that can, if we all surrendered, that a lot of things would be healed much easier. So I just ask you to search yourself for that.
Thank you.
Also, I have a question about your tattoos.
Uh-huh.
Are they your original tattoos?
No, ma'am. They've all been covered up since then.
They've all been covered up.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
will sleep well tonight.
Thank you. You know, and to answer just a little bit of your question, maybe not even answer it, but just to make a comment, I just don't know that I'm personally smart enough to understand what that higher power is. I don't want to have the ego and think that I know. I mean, I understand faith. I have faith in humanity, despite the ugliness, despite the darkness that we see, despite the divisiveness that we have. I have faith in humanity, and I really do believe that us together, once we can find a way, and maybe it's, you know, a utopian dream, but once we can find a way not to put aside our differences, because we are different, and that's what is the beauty of us, but that we are the same too, in many ways. That's when I think I will understand the higher power, because I really do believe that God is in all of us. I just made that up while I was here, by the way. Mm-hmm. Put spiritual agnostic into Webster's dictionary, maybe it'll catch on. Thank you. No, I think you're right. I think we need to be progressive. I think we need to adapt to our changing environment, to, you know, different generations of people who are, you know, frankly, much different than my generation or your generation or anybody's generation. And I think as adults, that may be part of our problem, is we tend to think what worked for us will work for our children, and that's not true. We need to adapt. And when we're stuck in old ways, maybe that's what fosters a lot of these problems that we're seeing, because we're so rigid and changing that we're afraid of change. So thank you. Yes?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm a local reporter. That's how I met him, outside the courthouse. And you have said it, they say they're coming back. I was outside the courthouse. Some of you may or may not know who Matthew Heimbach is, and Matt Parrott, the Traditionalist Worker Party. And we're in there.
It's another neo-Nazi organization.
He was one of the keynote speakers, Heimbach, and they're one of the biggest, most organized, and I think, threatening groups. They've been very busy. And James Fields had his first hearing, and we, the press, come out of the small courthouse. The national press was so sad to learn there's no cameras in the courtroom. They should talk to us. We know more than they do. And we see Matt Parrott dancing back and forth in the alley, temper tantrum. And we start to descend on him, and then I see this huge presence to the right, and I recognize Matt Heimbach. And there's so many days I've just really wanted to cleanse myself with a lot of hot water. And he said, "We'll be back. We'll be back." And you have said, "They'll be back." Is there something, whether at any level, what kind of actions, is there anything that the community can do, say, that makes Charlottesville less appealing for them to come back? It's been a while now since they've come back. And
Listen,
Well, I'm talking about
Listen.
these events, the big events like tiki torch marches and things like that.
Yeah.
Is there a way to make how can Charlottesville make itself less appealing for them to come back and put on a big show like a tiki
Charlottesville
torch?
should not compromise Charlottesville for the sake of the neo-Nazis that want to come here. Charlottesville was a great place before they came. It's going to continue to be a great place. And right now, we need to focus on the communities that maybe it's not that great a place for. Start there. Start there. Recognize that the statues in the communities, the Confederate statues, were put there to terrorize the people in those neighborhoods. They weren't put there to commemorate anybody. They were put there to say, okay, yeah, we're going to give you a little bit of leeway, but you're going to remember what we did. Guess what? They're still there.
Do you have any kind of knowledge of anything that they may be planning in the future, a way that the city can prepare for this?
No, I mean, I'm not an intelligence specialist. If that were the case, none of them would talk to me and I wouldn't be able to help anybody. But yeah. I can tell you that they're going to come back because this was the biggest platform they've ever had in recent history. And what I would suggest is if you want to make it a place that they don't want to come back to, is you make sure that every good-hearted college student, everybody in the police department who doesn't want them here, every community member, every faith leader, every teacher, every student comes out and shows them vocally and visibly, you're not welcome here with that. And you need to do it, whether you want to or not. Even if you just want to, don't get involved, just show up. Show them they're not welcome, there are more of you, and this isn't a place where they can do this again. And every time they come back, double it. You bring in the next town over and you have them come in. You go to Richmond and you bring that. You have to do this. This is a movement too, But it's not, when we say movement, it's not about being radical. It's not about being, extremists. But it is about being radical and extreme because it's radical love and it's radical compassion and it's all these things that you need to do even though it's uncomfortable. Use your tools. Maybe not everybody can show up, but maybe if you're a writer, you write about it. Maybe if you're a reporter, you go on camera and you say not what they want you to say, the party line or the company line. You say what's in your heart. And if you own a business, you make sure that the people that are protesting against the neo-Nazis are fed and that they have something to drink and that they have a safe place to go to if they need it. Do your part. Everybody has a tool. Yes?
You've talked a lot about young people and what young people need to do and how young people need to be protected. And I think I'm probably the youngest person here. And I think that you're correct. I know you're correct about a lot of young people joining white supremacist movements because they're vulnerable and ignorant and young. But our generation isn't entirely thoughtless and ignorant. I think the root of all this is the systematic oppression that has been in our society for years and years. And as a white person with white privilege, the young people and the old people and the white people, we need to do what we can to help people who are not privileged like us. There are people who don't even know and think that white privilege doesn't exist, and that's absolutely not true, and racism is something, there are people that are bigoted. And then there's the racism that is ingrained into people from our society from years and years of oppression. And as a white person, it is your responsibility to unlearn that and to learn how to treat people of color and oppressed people in your communities better. You need to learn how to do that.
Thank you. I never said that young people were ignorant and stupid. In fact, I said the opposite. I said young people are smart. We need to listen to them. But yeah, no, I think you're right. There's also something to be said about, we're seeing a lot of young white males go to these movements. And I don't want this to come off the wrong way. I'm not who I used to be. But if we keep marginalizing anybody, young whites, young blacks, young Latinos, immigrants, refugees, they will all become extreme at some point. Some of them will have been fed up. So I want us to make sure we're balancing the understanding of privilege, I agree with you. I know this. I have privilege. If I was standing next to an African American who was smarter than me, who had a better education than me, who made more money than me, if we were standing here and being interviewed by a white person, the chance is pretty good that I, would get that job versus maybe somebody else, just because they may, just be more comfortable or not understanding enough. I get that. But I want to be careful. As we are pushing out, and identifying white males as causing all the problems in the world, which I agree in the history of the world, white men have caused all the problems in history, we also cannot generalize and push them all away because they feel like something's being taken away from them. And when something is taken away from them, they may feel like they have to fight for it. And right now, what they're using, what the neo-Nazis are using, is this whole idea of white identity being stolen from them. So let's be very, very careful that we're not feeding into their narrative, okay? Because they use that. They use every little grain and they amplify it. Every little grain that they know that they can use, and they magnify it. So let's just be very, very careful about that.
Wow, I've got a real good, hard voice. I think the problem is that the narrative is false. We feed into it grain by grain, but underneath the narrative is false.
You are correct, ma'am.
The opposite of love is not hate. It is fear. If you look at my Facebook page, I spend time, that's all it is, giving new perspectives, asking us to look at different stuff, saying what I think is the reality, asking what you think is the reality. And that's my call, and it may be the call of anybody who's breathing on the earth at this time, to dismantle false narratives.
Yes.
I'm old. I don't have time to be doing drop by drop with somebody talking about something false. I need to get to the heart of it and foster that, build that up. That's the problem in this country. We have operated out of a false narrative. When are we going to ditch the false narrative? Because it is killing us.
Well, I can tell you that in this day and age, you are fighting technology. You are fighting millions of fake social media accounts that are pouring propaganda, false narratives, which is why we have to counter that with truth. Right now, the biggest thing under attack, truth. Once we lose that, game over, because there's no identifying the truth again once we lose it. So, as far as I'm concerned, what you say is spot on. But the reason I say that we have to use empathy and compassion is because that is more powerful than your truth against somebody else's truth. We can argue till the cows come home. You can tell somebody they're wrong. You can disown your racist uncle for posting, pro-Trump, anti-refugee conspiracy theories. I don't think that that's the goal we're looking for. The goal we're looking for is to connect with people based on truth that we can feel and see. Because we're going to always argue. And right now, frankly, we're going to lose that battle because they have figured out how to flood the internet with misinformation where young kids might be searching for something. It could be a Dylan Roof who goes online after the Trayvon Martin shooting and is suddenly, landing on a website that is completely distorting black on white crime statistics. And suddenly, because of the algorithms that exist online that likes to curate things for us, well, guess what? He's going to be fed more and more and more of those same stories that push him deeper and deeper down a rabbit hole. Once you're in that far, anybody else's truth, fake news, right? If I had a twin brother, and at birth, our parents separated us and sent my brother to one school and me to another. And at my school, they taught me that 2 and 2 is 4. But his whole life, the school that he went to, they taught him that 2 and 2 is 5. When we would come together for Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving, we would argue to the death that either one of us that he was right, and I would argue that I was right, because that's the set of facts that I have. The truth is, in America right now, there are two distinct realities, two distinct sets of facts. There are no bridges between them. Be the bridge. We have to be the bridge. And the way we do that is not by saying 2 and 2 really is 4 and you're wrong, but it's by saying, let's sit down, let's talk this through, and let's understand why 2 and 2 is 4 and not 5. But we also have to listen, because if we don't listen, well, then it becomes us prescribing something, and nobody wants to be talked to like that. So, I mean, I don't have all the answers, folks. What I do is not a silver bullet. What I do maybe won't work for everybody here, like Jolene pointed out, right? But I have my tool, and I know how to use it. All I'm asking is that we don't feed in to what they want us to do, and that is to be violent, to become divided, and to to just resort to saying, you're wrong. It doesn't work. Yes?
Yeah, and Reverend Brenda talked about bots, and and you talked about and also these false narratives that people are eating. But what do you do when law enforcement buys into some of those narratives? I mean, seriously, in the lead up to this, I was getting all these questions from the media, and also even from folks aligned with with city officials about, what's Antifa going to do? Professor Schmidt, what's Antifa going to do? And I'm like, I don't know what Antifa is going to do. They might come here and stand between Reverend Susan and a bunch of Nazis. They won't be offensive. They might defend people. Yeah. I don't know what they're going to do. But you know what? In the FOIA documents that we saw from law enforcement after the fact, you know who they weren't tracking? Traditional Workers' Party, Proud Boys, League of the South, Rise Above them. They weren't even tracking these people. But you know who was all over those documents? Black Lives Matter, showing up for racial justice, and Antifa, and we were all conflated together. And this was law enforcement. And then we FOIA'd further, and they were getting some of their information literally from bots. Yeah. The bots were saying, oh, you better watch. Surge, BLM, and Antifa, they're going to start all this violence, and that's what they went with.
When our president gets his information the same way.
I mean, I'm talking local.
I find it hard.
Local law enforcement here.
I think we have to understand, too, law enforcement are human beings, too, who make mistakes, who can learn from their mistakes. And frankly, maybe it's our job to educate them and not push them.
We tried in the lead up.
I understand. I was not here, so I don't know what's been, the nuance of what's been happening between all the various groups. What I would encourage, and I see a police officer in the back, I don't know if you're Charlottesville PD or not, is, there are good people. Not all cops are bad. That there are people there that are restrained on what they can do because, frankly, they need to feed their families too and maybe can't speak up. But what I would do is encourage those folks who do understand that law enforcement is about protecting the safety of the community and not labeling them as, terrorists or agitators or thugs or whatever. It's the responsibility of everybody to be the best person they can be. I spoke to the police department. I went there earlier this week and I presented to them. It was a different presentation. But what I explained to them was that we can't generalize these groups. We cannot fear Antifa because of what we hear. But if there are Antifa folks who prove their point by throwing a bottle or a can filled with concrete, that it just cements that, sorry for the pun, it just cements that further in their psyche that that's what they believe. So I say to those groups, you need to do the same thing within the organizations. If there are 1 or 2 people who are making you look bad, get them out. Direct action is the right way to do this. But the minute that somebody from that direct action decides that they want to be violent, guess what? That is propaganda that that the enemy uses. And while police officers believe it, so do regular people. There are lots of people who come up to me and say, well, why aren't you talking about Antifa? Because they're extremists. And I say, not in my experience. There are bad people in every group who want to be extreme, and that may be, giving everybody else a bad name. But yeah. I mean, I wouldn't make that. I wouldn't equate both sides. There were not, well-intentioned people on that one side. There may be, and don't get me wrong, there may have been good people there who forgot how to be good and who can be good again. Because if I didn't think there were good people here, I would be denying myself of who I am and telling myself that I could never have changed. So I understand that there may be people there who were good, but they forgot how to do that. I also guarantee you that there were people at that rally that came home from that rally and said, this is not what I signed up for. But maybe they didn't say that if they got hit with that one bottle, or, maybe that would have pushed them further away. Like I said, I don't have all the answers. All I can do is give you my insight. And all the tools in this room, everybody's, not everybody's a carpenter. Some people are electricians. Some people are artists. We have to use our tools, but they only work if it's a concerted effort from everybody. So don't alienate the groups that mean well, that may just be talked about as bad people. Understand them before you make that judgment, otherwise you're just as bad as the Nazis. Yes,
I
ma'am.
just wanted to address the...
We'll go to you next, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The narrative we're telling ourselves about what happened, and that now there is divisiveness, and it may be, actually, that this pulled the lid off of a whole lot of things that needed to be seen. It certainly lifted the carpet on racism in Charlottesville that a lot of people hadn't been looking at before.
But why haven't the hundreds of rallies before that happen every month in every city in America lifted, the cover? Why do people have to die, or they have to be put on television before we say, oh, now it's time to act? And I'm sorry to cut you off, but I hear this like Charlottesville was the only rally. There were rallies 30 years ago that were just as bad, just as big as the rally that happened here, and we never talk about it. We never acknowledge that it exists. We are happy to put those people in the sewers and weld the sewer caps on, but guess what? They come up, and when they do, we're all surprised. Oh, what? We have white supremacists? Yeah, of course we do. And we can't just start now. We had to have started a long time ago. But because we didn't, we have to start now.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if you could share the response of the local police with whom you shared your presentation earlier this week.
There were maybe 15 or 20. It was pulled together at the last minute. So it was 15 or 20 people from Charlottesville PD, some intelligence people. I let them know that there's somebody else out there, but also people from other counties and cities there. And the response was positive. It was overwhelmingly positive. I had people come up to me and say, I never thought of it that way. Or, maybe we should change our approach. One in particular that I mentioned to them, which they knew nothing about, and I suspect maybe none of you know anything about, is the white supremacists are actively online targeting very specifically the most vulnerable. They're going to gaming forums where they know that maybe lonely, kind of marginalized people are. They're going to mental health forums for ADHD and for autism and for schizophrenia. They are doing that. And we need to understand that they are specifically targeting vulnerable people, not just vulnerable, broken people with, feelings of loneliness, but people who may already be socially awkward and not able to fit in, they're exploiting that. We need to understand that this is happening. They're using every weapon in their arsenal to try and amass as many people as possible. And they know that some people are a little bit easier to fool than others. They go into communities where they know people are poor. And they can say, well, you know, you're poor because of those people, or you're out of work because of those people, or you're not accepted in society because they don't value your identity. This is what they do. They lie. They take something that maybe has a grain of truth somewhere and they amplify it until it becomes this massive conspiracy theory. This is a snowball. It affects generation after generation after generation. We need to be very, very careful. Can I just go to somebody who hasn't asked a question already? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry,
Sir,
I'm not a pastor, but I do have a few thoughts. First of all, I was deeply touched by your telling your story.
Thank you.
And, you know, it'll take me a day or two before I can really speak intelligently about that. But thank you for coming. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for being open and for sharing.
Okay. Thank you.
So, you know, I'm just speaking for all of us in expressing our thanks and appreciation to you. So that's the first comment. As a former IBMer, I'm curious.
Oh, Big Blue, you even got the blue on right there. Thank you for that first part. That really
I'm curious
is
how
everything.
your IBM career evolved and how you've been able to support yourself as you've gone through your journey.
I ended up working for IBM for 7 years. That first job I told you about was actually hired on as a contractor for IBM within 6 months. I had everybody fooled and they thought I was great and I was pretty good at my job, but they hired me on full time. I didn't have a college degree. I certainly wasn't open with them about who I was. It took me, you know, some time to do that. I was very afraid. I ended up becoming a marketing operations specialist, running my own division. And I wish I would have done this for myself, but I ended up in 12 quarters raising $250 million of new business for them. I haven't been able to do that for myself for some reason, but no, it was actually, I learned a lot because I was exposed for the first time to the professional world and to people and how they operated and how, you know, where different cultures, you know, had interesting perspectives that were different from mine. It was a wonderful experience, but I hated working on behind a desk. I wanted to get out on the streets. I knew that that's where I needed to be, and that's what I was built for. People ask me all the time, like, do you regret your past? Do you wish it didn't happen? Of course I regret it. I still have a lot of shame for what I did. I planted a lot of seeds of hate. I'm still pulling up the weeds from that. Every time something happens anywhere that's related to this, I feel responsible for that because I know I put ideas out into the world that still are influencing people. The slide that didn't play for you after the Dylan Roof slide, if you'll allow me to share this with you, was an image from a website called Stormfront. It's a white supremacist website, a very popular one. And just a few months ago, somebody showed me a post that Dylan Roof had made in Stormfront just 4 months before he walked into that church in Charleston and murdered, 9 innocent people. And it was a post that he had made asking about a band whose lyrics he had heard. That band was my band. So I know that the ideas that I put out into the world are still there. That my music is still influencing people despite me playing whack-a-mole to try and have it removed. That's why I do what I do. I don't want to see another Heather Heyer lose her life. I don't want to see any more police officers lose their lives because they just went to work one day and because the Nazis decided to march, they couldn't go home. Or that 9 people who were praying to their God in a church that's really not that different than this one couldn't go home to their families because some young kid was fooled by the same propaganda that I put out into the world. And that's why I do what I do. Thank you. We both shared a little bit of a cry right now, so thanks.
Thank you. So my other comment, it seems to me we've had 2 kinds of conversations going on here. One is the fairly comfortable conversation about we and they, where we in this room are all the good guys, and we're talking about the intelligence about the bad guys. So that's fairly comfortable for us. But it sounds like, you have shared a lot of useful information. Your question about what can we do? Are they going to come back? And we know the answer is they will continue to focus on Charlottesville. And you've made a very strong case for us to show up in numbers, to not be silent, and also not to be violent. So I think that's very helpful, and I hope our community can get that, and that when the next event occurs, there will be 25 or 50,000 people that could be here and simply stand up for what we believe in, and maybe just enough to have posters. So, thank you for enlightening us about the 200,000 white supremacists. And fortunately, the Southern Poverty Law Center has wonderful publications and shares that.
As does the Anti-Defamation League. They're very good at their research. So.
The other conversation...
Thank you for doing that.
Right, so all of you who contribute to that knowledge, I'm grateful as a consumer. Obviously, the other conversation is the one within each one of our hearts. I come here as a white, not suprematist, but certainly as a white racist. What I've learned from this awakening that has happened in this community is that I cannot avoid being racist. I mean, all of us carry our judgments. I've heard them in almost everybody who's spoken here today. And as a white person, a lot of my judgments are racist. I also come here as a white supremacist because I'm used to believing that what I think is right, that what I want I can get, and I'm a person of privilege. So that makes me, and it gives me the qualities of being a supremacist. So I have to own that it's not just they who are the bad guys, it's me. In my heart, I'm also the bad guy, and I'm here to be touched.
Thank you.
To be moved, to learn and to grow and to love. So thank you all for participating in that.
Thank you. Can I give you a hug?
I'm done.
Thank you for sharing that. I wish more people would find the courage to be that open, that vulnerable, and say, you know what? I was wrong. What I'm doing is, even though I'm not necessarily like them, maybe I'm complicit in this in some way. And what do I need to do to reevaluate how I'm contributing to either the problem or the solution? Thank you for sharing that. I think you've inspired me and other people in this room too. Thank you. I want to give the microphone to this lady in the back because she's been patiently waiting. You, ma'am. Did you have your hand up?
You already answered.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Julie, and I'm also not a clergy, but a mental health worker in our community. And I really wanted to ask you about courage. It's been a theme here today in various forms. And finding a way to talk with the worried well, as it were, the vast majority of people around our community who want to do something and want to do it badly and want to do it intensely, but it's very hard to engage sometimes with what could that be, and people's fear of physical harm and their fear of their fear of conflict and battle.
Sure.
And my concern is, I guess, both in myself but with those around me, is how to continue stoking the courage to act when the stakes are just going to get higher. I mean, everybody knows that. The stakes are going to get higher, not less.
Yeah.
So people who dared to show up maybe won't, or people who would have showed up but then saw what happened won't, or that kind of question.
I have two answers to that. One, stop wasting time arguing. Sit down, but don't do it in big groups, because It's the same reason I don't walk into a white supremacist rally and say, hey, how can I help you guys get out? Not because there's a danger involved, but also because I know there's a groupthink involved and nobody wants to be vulnerable. That's why I do it one-on-one. But that's not scalable. That's why I'm here to recruit you, all of you. But I will say one thing too, is our greatest strength is our ability to be vulnerable with each other. Because if we carry that armor and put that shield up all the time, it stops good people from understanding each other. We have to be okay with saying, like this gentleman did, I'm wrong. And it's okay. It's okay to be broken. We're all broken. We're all suffering from something that nobody else knows about. We're all dealing with something that nobody understands. And sometimes we don't understand. And when we're vulnerable, I'm not saying, go out there and say, ready to be killed or die or be hit, but vulnerable with feelings and with ideas, and it's okay to say, I don't know what to do. What can I do? In fact, that's what we should be saying instead of, hey, I know what to do and that's what you're going to do. I don't know what to do. And that's why we need to sit down and figure it out, because if we don't, we will not be prepared. And I guarantee you that when they come back, I will be here asking you how I can help.
And
yes.
I would also say, for people who are saying, I don't want to go confront in the streets, there's a whole generation of children now who need to be inoculated against this. So we need to start, for people who are saying, I want to help, I want to work to end this, but they don't want to take that, they're not ready for that risk, or they can't take that risk for whatever reason, then they should be looking for those vulnerable children and helping them develop those relationships, make those connections, learn to think for themselves. All the things that, I pour into my almost 12-year-old son every day. There are other children who are not getting that. And so people can reach out, find those vulnerable children, and coach a soccer team, do whatever, build a relationship with those kids so that they are not as vulnerable and they're not looking on the internet to find the answers that they need, because God help us all, that's a cesspool where, there aren't real relationships being built, but people think they're real.
Good point. Please don't ostracize the people you don't see out there protesting. Instead, encourage them to use the tools that they're comfortable with to use. Second point, have you been watching my talks? Because you said something that I always say, and I forgot to say this time. This is like treating polio. I help the sick people, right? But in order to stop polio, we need to inoculate the population from getting sick, okay? If we're always worrying about the sick people, we're not worrying about the plague that already exists and is keep infecting everybody else. So maybe some people can find it, as their place to go out there and treat the sick. And some people can go out there and find a place and use their tools to inoculate the population from being sick. So thank you for that. I forgot to say that, and you reminded me because you used my word. I think we're going to take one more question, and if you don't mind, somebody who hasn't asked one yet and who would like to, or you can ask again. Ma'am, I think she would like to ask something.
What thoughts do you have about the elected officials in this whole tragedy?
First thing I'll say before I give you my opinion on the current administration is vote. Vote. If we don't vote, things like this happen. So let me tell you what I think. I think I hear the same things coming out of this administration that I used to say 30 years ago. Maybe the words are a little bit different. And some people call them dog whistles. It's a bullhorn to me because I recognize them. I used to say them. When they talk about building a wall or a Muslim ban or, not taking in refugees, I used to say those same things. I just didn't call them, refugees and Mexicans and things like that. I used worse words. So they've learned to make their message more palatable so that, more people can resonate. It can resonate with more people. I don't want to make this a political discussion. I really don't care who you voted for. But I hope that what is happening now, the divisiveness, the fear rhetoric that's coming out of the administration, that you recognize that is not what America should be. It may be what America is about, but I don't believe it is the vision of what we believe America could be, should be. I don't want to say the original vision of America because then I would potentially be saying, it's a white supremacist vision because there were people who may not have been wearing armbands 250 years ago, but came here and owned slaves and brought slaves who some people claim are immigrants. America is not a country of immigrants. America is a country of immigrants and natives and former slaves. We need to recognize that. And until we do, it's that, I think what you were talking about, ma'am, it's this kind of vision of what I think, not taking into account what it might feel like for somebody else, which is why I talk about empathy. Really it's not just about putting yourself in somebody's shoes, it's about walking in them. So we have to learn to do that. Folks, I just want to say thank you. I don't want to take up all your Saturday. It's starting to be sunny and hopefully a little warmer out there, but I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by the dialogue, even though sometimes it was loud. At least I think it may have been better than some of the dialogue that's been happening. I'm encouraged because it's clear people are passionate about this. We just need to find a solution where we can become a team to work together and utilize our different tools and our specialties that we're good at to make this a great place again. Because I think everybody's here because they love Charlottesville. You love your community, and you want to see it be a safe place that's not under attack every day, that's not spotlighted in the national media in a dark way, and that's a safe place for our kids and our families and our faith communities to really just find a way to live together in harmony. But we have to also recognize that some people just don't have the luxury of being able to snap into that harmony. So, thank you very much. Just say too, I'll put out some books here on the pew. If you would like one, please feel free to grab one. I don't know if there's one for everybody, but there may be. So, first come, first served.